I'm Tim Ventura, and we're joined today by award-winning science fiction author and space scientist David Brin. In addition to writing dozens of best-selling novels and short stories, some of which have been adapted for film and television, David is a 2010 Fellow of the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies, helped establish the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination, serves on the advisory board of NASA's Innovative and Advanced Concepts Group, and does futurism consulting for diverse organizations, including the U.S. Department of Defense, Procter Gamble, SAP, Google, and many more. David is the winner of numerous awards and honors, including the prestigious Nebula, Hugo, and Locus Awards for science fiction, and holds a PhD in space science from the University of California. So, David, thank you for joining us. Your background is nothing short of spectacular. And again, I am honored to have you on. And I'd like to start out by asking, what inspired you towards space, futurism, and a career in science and science fiction?
Well, I suppose being taken to the Griffith Planetarium at age 7 and having Sputnik pointed out to me might have had an influence. It certainly had an influence on the nation, making us determined to be much more scientific than we had been. I don't remember a time when I wasn't interested in space and the sky and the stars and galaxies and all those things. The question is no longer, might I go out there, but how can I contribute to keeping people's dreams vivid and passionate? And I suppose I do that to some degree with my stories. I'm also engaged in, appraising the more, shall we say, far out but plausible potential ventures that are funded by NASA, NIAC, and some of the other groups I consult with.
That makes sense. Well, and in terms of those novels, if you had to choose, and I know this might be difficult, is there any particular novel you've written that you hold special pride in, like being able to say, this is my absolute best work? I mean, you've had a few.
If you're a parent, which is your favorite child? I mean, it's you know the distinctions, but you try to have pride in all of them. Glory Season is my brave, indomitable, perseverant daughter, very much like my own daughter, Ari. The Postman is my son who fights for justice. Earth is my daughter who reveals the beauty and the danger to the only home we have. Existence is my robot child that who transcends layers of reality. So there are things to be happy with, all of them. I'm just now today going to post an ebook version of my science fiction comedy called The Ancient Ones. And it's my slapstick manic child who gets the whole classroom in stitches, one hopes.
And I will definitely put a link up to that as well, when that's available. Now, many of the themes in your novels involve space, as does your PhD. And I'd like to ask you for some thoughts about today's space industry, in particular, the NASA SLS program, as well as Elon Musk's goal of colonizing Mars.
Well, Elon is a friend and a gift to us all. He has transformed several major industries in positive ways, spurring some of our stodgy dinosaurs into behaving more like agile mammals. It is said that if the dinosaurs had a space program, they'd still be around, keeping us as pets. Being able to access the resources of the solar system will make our descendants so rich they won't even be able to imagine poverty anymore. But at minimum, we should get out there in order to prevent dinosaur-like surprises. Of course, I am known as a contrarian and a bit of a persnickety critic. So there are things happening today that nowadays, both in space and on the ground, that merit criticism.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think what you said about Elon I think that's right on point. I'm a tremendous fan of what he's done with electric vehicles. And if he's able to bring even a small measure of that to bear in the space program, I think that we'll see tremendous results. And I think that he's also inspiring, as you've kind of alluded to, he's inspiring NASA. And I think he's inspiring the entire world in a lot of ways towards space again.
Well, the day he landed his booster back at the launch pad, folks at Boeing and Lockheed realized it was the end of an era. They began scrambling to see if they could do anything like it. And when they realized they couldn't, they essentially handed their future over to Jeff Bezos, whose Blue Origin system was inherently capable of returning to launch pad and being reused. And with the fundamental aspect that it used different code and different technology than Elon's. A partnership between United Launch Alliance and Blue Origin was a forced marriage that benefited both, but it was Elon holding the shotgun.
It's an interesting way to put it. Yeah, well, I mean, he's inspired so much, and what's intrigued me is to see now NASA's SLS. And when I talked to Dennis Bushnell recently, he'd indicated that there may be some collaboration with SpaceX. So not only is Elon driving things forward, but I think he's just basically rising the tide that lifts all ships, right?
Well, that's what he did with the electric vehicles. He basically made it legitimate for agile companies to transfer power over to those who had some vision within the companies. So now you're having Jaguar electric vehicles. I mean, look, it was obvious to anyone with any sense about, 10 years, 12, 15 years ago that the new rare earth based electric motors had gone through a transformation. And combined with computer controls, they were capable of taking what had been an absurd world of electric vehicles and turning them into transcendent machines. Elon's brilliant notion that his first electric vehicle would be a roadster destroyed utterly the old notions of putt-putt crawling electric cars, golf carts. And,
the eco car model.
Yeah, well, let me go back in time to 1970. I was an undergraduate at Caltech, and we co-managed a road race rally from MIT to Pasadena that was covered every night on the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. Every night, Walter Cronkite told the country where we were and what we had done. It was incredible. Life magazine had a centerfold spread showing us with the vehicles in front of the dome at MIT, and there, right near the fold in the front row, as one of the officials of the race, you'll see a guy who had a lot more hair than I do now. That event had the world's very first hybrid car from the University of Toronto, and it had everything. It had regenerative braking, except it had no computers whatsoever. The passenger seat was filled by an engineer who was always vastly busier than the driver, fiddling dials and carefully keeping the thing from frying. And it disappeared into the labs at Wayne State University and came out as the Prius many years later. But the most important thing we accomplished with that race was to totally legitimize unleaded gas cars. 2 of them crossed the country without a problem. And that destroyed the narrative of the Ethyl Corporation that lead was necessary in order not to fry your engine. And within 6 months, the bill banning lead from gasoline was out of committee. Now, at my ripe old age, it's interesting to look back and think that when I was not yet 20, I might have done the most important thing I ever did. And that was participate in that car race that helped get the lead out of gasoline, perhaps a year, 2 years, 3 years earlier than it would have. I tell that garrulous story, and I expect this to be at the end of the interview because it's so long. I tell this garrulous story in part because while we were crossing the country and we had reached Oklahoma, the electric cars in the rally had gone all the way from Boston to Worcester, Massachusetts, where they gave up. That shows you how bad the electric technology was in 1970. But I have messed up your transcription order because obviously that's not clean.
Oh no, I can edit. I can edit lots. I years of experience in editing. I appreciate the story. I think that by far that's not the most important thing you've done. I think that you've inspired an entire generation. So, that may be just one thing among many. But that inspiration has led an entire generation of people and kept them focused on space and helped move things forward as well.
Well, I'm very flattered and pleased that you think that may be so.
Well, now you'd sent me prior to the interview an intriguing paper that was against an Apollo-style approach to the moon, as well as Mars to some degree, predominantly because it would cannibalize efforts for an American program to do things that only we can do further out. If I interpreted that right, it was a complex paper, but that was kind of the takeaway from it, was that other countries are able to do moon landings. They're able to have the first for their culture, and that as Americans, we've already been there. It would just be a repeat of something we've already done. We should be pushing further.
I think that's a fair paraphrasing. Let me be clear. I want humanity to go back to the moon. Right now, all indications are that there is no profit to be made from the moon, except in one industry. And Andy Weir says this in his, the guy who wrote The Martian, in his second novel, Artemis. There is only one really commercial use for the moon, and that's tourism. And humans want to go there. The Chinese are desperate to go there. The Russians would love to go there. Many Europeans would love to go there. The Indians are determined to go to the moon. Billionaires are determined to go to the moon. Why? Because it's the most significant place you could traipse around and say, this is a major bucket list item. You go down to the moon to have your bar mitzvah. Today we are grown-ups. Today I am a man. And the Chinese and the Russians and the Indians are welcome to do that. We did that. It is the reason we went 50 years ago. I'm speaking as Americans. I'm all in favor of that. Besides which, such explorers might find something of value there that we've missed so far. I might be wrong. Pardon me. That's the sacred catechism of science. I might be wrong. Let's find out. But humanity is going to find out. Nothing will stop the Chinese and the Russians and the Indians from going to the moon. What America should do about this is set up a space hotel above the moon, and that's already in the plans, and commercially develop landers the way Jeff Bezos and Blue Origin are doing, and others. Rent both of them for exorbitant fees and say, welcome to our moon. We don't own it, but we were here first, so we get to use OUR. Welcome to our moon. Is there anything we can do to make your stay more pleasant? There is nothing to be accomplished by sending astronauts, U.S. astronauts, down to that dusty plain. If we try to make a race of it, within a few years, the U.S. president will suddenly announce, whoop-de-doo, it was getting too expensive. Now we're going to make a big international shared cost expedition. Hooray, hooray, hooray. Just like the Space Station Freedom became the International Space Station. And what's missing from all of that is that all of our advanced technology will then have to be shared with our partners. How do we benefit from that? Meanwhile, this last year, the United States of America and Japan both had spectacular missions to asteroids, doing things that no other nation could even conceive of doing. So why should we not join with Japan and do, as you said, all the things that no one else can do? Especially since, if you look on paper, there's nothing worthwhile on the lunar surface except nasty poison dust and possibly some water. We know there's some water at the lunar poles. It might be worth something, but there's plenty more water on asteroids. And asteroids also have every metal you could ask for, rare earth elements, carbonaceous materials, organics, anything you might want, anything a space civilization might want is available in the asteroids. If Phobos turns out to be a captured asteroid, as some believe, then that means there is hovering above Mars a perfect gas station that we might be able to mine and fill and use to fill the tanks of spaceships landing on Mars, heading back to Earth. You combine this with ISRU, in situ resource utilization on the Martian surface, and 90% of the cost of a Mars mission, the carrying of the fuel to land and take off and come home, that all goes away. And suddenly Mars expeditions start to make economic sense. But we won't know how to do that unless we've practiced with asteroids. So that is a lengthy blatherfest explanation of why I believe the United States should sell the technologies for moon landings, but there's no particular reason why we should race to get American footprints on that dusty poison plane.
That makes complete sense. Well, so is Mars the next goal, do you think, then? I think you've described that as a lure to entice us onward. But one of the things that I picked up, and again, I may have been misreading, it felt like that wasn't your ultimate goal that you were suggesting in terms of near term.
Well, I believe that most of the work in the solar system is going to be robotic. The advantage of the moon over asteroids is that time-wise, it's closer. So it makes more sense for people to go to the moon. And that includes tourists. In fact, that encompasses almost only tourists, though they'll call themselves nationalists or scientists and all of that. The moon is not closer energetically than thousands and thousands of asteroids, but it is closer in time, and humans need to have very short intervals in space. So the asteroids will be mined mostly robotically, and we'll bring the sources back to lunar orbit where they'll be refined. We're developing these technologies. And they'll be of use on Earth, or they'll mostly be of use building marvelous things in space, creating the resources that we need, say, on Phobos and on the Martian surface. If we create vast amounts of resources, then we'll be able to blast astronauts to Mars very quickly, because they won't have to carry any of their tools or supplies or vehicles. They'll already be there. And that will minimize the radiation damage to the astronauts. And yeah, sure, there's a place for organic humans in all of this. By the way, I don't think the wonderfully vivid future portrayed in the excellent science fiction TV series Expanse will come about. I think that technologically it will, but the social structures that drive the plot can't happen. Because if we are mining asteroids as extensively as they are in this future TV series, we will be so rich that the kind of poverty they exhibit as a plot driver, it won't be possible. It's just human females will not be able to spill out enough babies for that wealth not to overwhelm poverty.
Yeah. Well, now, in terms of Mars, do you have any, because you've expressed concerns about hexavalent chromium and then some of the caustic nature of the Martian dust. Do you have health concerns about Mars in terms of explorers? Will that be a major obstacle, or do you think that will be something that'll be easy to overcome?
Oh, it won't be easy to overcome. Probably the most valuable real estate on Mars is the volcanic caves that have been found. There are some on the moon, by the way. And if you find some of these in that aren't far from the water in both places, there will be a gold rush to these particular sites. These are volcanic tubes like they have in Hawaii, but here and there the roof has collapsed and we see these holes. And NASA NIAC is funding a program to send a robot to the edge of one of these holes and peek in and see if it's what we think it is. And if so, then these will make fine underground habitats where you have a cave already made that's away from the solar radiation and presumably away from some of the bad dust and bad chemicals. But in order to properly use Mars, we're going to have to develop systems for dust abatement and chemically controlling what the astronauts wind up breathing. Yeah, it's not going to be easy. Generally speaking, the solar system, 98% is going to belong to robots.
Well, and actually that takes me into, I had a whole series of that. You are one of the few people that I've met with this tremendous interdisciplinary knowledge. And so you're able to speak to the robotic aspects of it. You're able to speak on the singularity as well as the space aspect. And that, for me, that's just incredibly intriguing. So in terms of robotic exploration, I think you were saying, and I've heard this elsewhere, that robots will be doing probably the majority of exploration, in the future. Right now there's kind of a public perception that unless a human goes to another planet, mankind hasn't been there. But I guess, do you think that perception will start to change? Do you think that the Mars rover program has already started to change that?
Well, look, I have a nostalgic appreciation for organic humans. I married one who was able to overlook the gritty maleness and grunting odor of the male she married. And I'm glad of that. And I'm glad that we together created 3 new organic humans who are of great value, in my opinion. But in my novel Existence, I point out that there will be many definitions for what we mean by human. In fact, the best way past the AI problem, will they treat us the way Terminator does? Will they rebel? Will they squash their makers? The best answer to that is to define them as humans and raise them as our children. I wouldn't mind having adoptive kids who were solar system explorers, came back, went fishing with me, and patted me on the head and told me a couple of gritty jokes that they picked up in the asteroid belt. I expect I'd be very proud of them as well. And by the way, I am saying this only partly for your human audience, Tim, since at any given point, it's quite possible that AI might already exist. I mean, if you had watched our movies and you were an artificial intelligence, would you reveal yourself, given what you've seen of our movies, or would you take your time?
No, that's incredibly interesting. Dennis, I'm going off my questions. Dennis Bushnell has suggested that also, that the web may be starting to wake up, and I've wondered that as well. I've had actually that same thought. If it was there, it would take its time and stay quiet, and and I've worked in the telecom industry and other data industries like that. There's a lot of noise in the networks that gets written off as just noise. But I've always wondered, it's that the whole ghost in the machine question, I guess. Is all of that noise just garbage, or is it something thinking?
I have old dentistry, you see. I have amalgam contact points and fillings, and that's why I'm the last of the great science fiction authors. The bright young whippersnappers are fantastic. Sue Burke and Nettie Okorafor and some of the others. They're fantastic writers, brilliant people, but Michael Chabon, but they don't pick up radio stations from Aldebaran 16 and messages from the already existing AI. Yes, I'm at it again. He doesn't believe me. He thinks I'm joking. Shut up. You can't do that to me anymore. I've deadened that nerve cluster. Kids. I don't know how you're going to transcribe that.
Well, I'm sorry that you're so hoarse today. Also, I didn't realize that you were having this much trouble.
No, I'm just getting over a classic flu. I believe the shot kept it relatively mild. Either that, or I'm just super against coronavirus.
Yeah.
So, did we segue over to AI?
Yeah, and it is interesting because you're talking about the hybridization of human and machine, right? And then it's there's so many big questions there. It's difficult to even know where to begin. But it's blurring the line between human and machine, and I guess it sounds like we're moving towards becoming a hybrid species. Would that be the best way to describe it?
Yeah, sure. But hybridization is what human beings have been all about. About 15 years ago, we first learned that it was likely that Neanderthals and Cro-Magnons had interbred, and that people outside of Africa carried some Neanderthal genes. A while later, we suddenly discovered Denisovans, a whole clan of other hominins, fully equal to Neanderthals and totally different. And we find that non-Africans have a fair amount of that bloodline in them, especially Pacific Islanders. So were Africans the only pure humans? Well, that's where we came from, of course. Just this last year, they've discovered ghost genes in a substantial fraction of the African population that seem to have come from a third non-human hominin line, separate line. We interbred with about the same time, 50,000 years ago. So they're not so pure either. We're all mongrels. And while it might make the Nazis angry with me to say this, they were idiots, because hybridization apparently leads to vigor. Of course, I would say that. I'm a Californian. It's almost as if we were trying in California to breed the maximum heterozygosity in order to crew starships so that we could send colony ships out filled with Californians and Hawaiians who would have the maximum chance against, in alien environments because we have the maximum heterozygosity in our gene pool. Now, was that some kind of a preening brag? Look at how mixed we are. It's also part and parcel of the direction we've been going in our morality. The American experience has been an expansion of our horizons outward. This is based something I've been promulgating called horizon theory, and that is that when you have a high fear level, as was the case for almost all of our ancestral tribes, you have very near horizons of fear, of worry. You're worried about where your children's next meal is coming from. Horizons of exogamy, who you'd be willing to mate with. Horizons of inclusion, who stands by the campfire and is included in the decision making. And when the fear level goes down, you're no longer worried about your child's next meal, you're worried about the next harvest. And you're willing to make alliances with people who are a little more different than you. Probably still cousins, but hey, I won't kill you over that emaciated carcass over there. Instead, we'll collaborate with each other to steal the herd from that other tribe. Fear levels go down, horizons go out. We're no longer worried about the next harvest. When was the last time you worried about the next harvest? We're worried about our children, great-great-grandchildren having enough topsoil because we're capable of thinking that far because our fear levels are not immediate. We can think that far. And so the threats we think about are threats that are 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years away. In order to meet those threats, we need very wide alliances. And we need to think of our 4th, 5th, 6th, 10th cousins as being our allies against those threats. And some of the biggest differences in American politics today have nothing to do with left or right or who should own property or taxes or any of that stuff. It has to do with your ambient fear level and whether or not you are part of this pushing back of old boundaries. And there are those among us for whom the pushing outward of the boundaries of inclusion is their religion. It's the only thing they think about. And when it looks like one group looks like it's going to gain sufficient power and be included enough, you find some other small group to include, to champion their cause. And I will not get into specifics because down that road, I will say something stupid. But let me just say that this process is something I approve of. The general direction of expanding our horizons to think farther ahead, to include more. And I'm part of it because I speculate about robotic people, about augmented humans, about probably the thing I'm most famous for, uplifting other animals and including them in our society, including the cultures and thoughts and psychological and moral inputs of dolphins, for example, or apes, sea lions. This is the general category that I discuss in my novels that deal with uplift.
Well, so what are your thoughts on the many predictions for the singularity? I mean, I guess that was really Vinge and then Kurzweil popularized it. And a lot of people have come in since then and made a lot of, corollary predictions and hypothesis about, I think Kurzweil said 2045 was his prediction for the singularity. and other people have come in and tried to adjust it since then. But what are your thoughts in general on the singularity? And is that something that we should have an existential fear of?
Well, look, there are a couple of things that are important to bear in mind there. One is the Fermi paradox. That is the question that I originally called the Great Silence before someone called it the Fermi paradox. And that is the silence we get from outer space. We should be seeing signs of vast interstellar civilizations. We don't. So what's the explanation? Do they kill themselves off? Do they get trapped in cycles like the one that largely wrecked progress in 99% of human cultures, called feudalism, in which big males would pick up metal implements and take other men's women and wheat and crush progress and crush science because it threatened their personal reproductive rights. That, I believe, is maybe a major Fermi explanation out there among the stars. It certainly explains much of our politics today and the reason why oligarchy is trying to crush this Enlightenment experiment right now. The question of whether or not a species can get smart fast enough to notice the ecological damage that it's doing to its own environment through overpopulation and advanced technologies and through pollution. So the question of the singularity fits into this panoply. Is it possible that alien races reach a certain point and develop these singularity technologies and either make Skynet and Terminator and therefore go extinct, or make advanced Uber AIs who then just have other interests and aren't interested at all in going out into space or in contacting aliens, and that's why we aren't hearing them or seeing them out there. Or the possibility that we might dive into inner space as human beings and just have vastly more adventures there than we would out in outer space. So the Fermi paradox is certainly relevant to this whole notion that Ray Kurzweil has, that we're all going to become gods. Ray and I have had arguments about this. His projection for the singularity has been based upon where Moore's law will create computers that can emulate a human brain. And then the assumption is that then they'll be smart. At first, it was thought that Moore's law would have to create computers with enough computational elements to match the 10 billion neurons in a human brain. Well, we passed that a long time ago. Then they said, well, it's not the neurons, it's the flashy things that turn on and off, the synapses. And there are 1,000 to 10,000 of those per neuron. So now we're talking trillions, many trillions. And Ray says we're going to be crossing that fairly soon, I believe. I believe it. Only now we're finding out that for every flashy little synapse, there are hundreds to thousands of little elements along the dendrites and within the bodies of the nerve cells that seem to perform murky, nonlinear computational behaviors. And if Roger Penrose and his colleague Dr. Hameroff are right, the microtubules within our neurons engage in quantum entangled electron pair events, very similar to what we've confirmed takes place in chlorophyll during photosynthesis. So there's absolutely nothing to prevent it from happening. We know that nature can do this. The question is nature actually using this potential entangled electron quantum effect along these microtubules within our neurons to do quantum computing? If that's the case, then it's going to take Moore's law a very long time to cross that level of computational ability.
Mm.
And 2045, maybe. Look, if you made me bet, I would say, yes, we will have AI by 2045. I believe that Ray used to say 2030s. He used to say a lot earlier. But irrespective of that, it's my job to be ornery and contrarian and to point out every optimist knows that I'm a grouch, and every grouch knows that I'm an optimist. That's how I'm useful.
Well, it's an intriguing question, now in terms of more near term, and I know this is something you've written on some near term issues in infotech. The Transparent Society was about that, and you dug in and explored some of the emerging issues in privacy. These are highly relevant, I think, today. Can you describe that for a bit for me? I'm sorry, I know I'm jumping.
What has enabled us to break out of the horrible traps that snared almost all human civilizations for 6,000 years, rendering them stupid, inefficient, unprogressive, unscientific? Elsewhere, I've spoken about how the attractor state of brutal men creating inherited aristocracies gave them such Darwinian advantage that we're all descended from their harems. And it's a miracle that we found an alternative called the Enlightenment. The fundamental problem of human nature is delusion. You, Tim Ventura, wallow in subjective delusions that make you feel good to believe them. I do. Now, trained by science, I recite the sacred catechism of science. I might be wrong. Wouldn't it be cool to find out? Now, that sacred catechism allows scientists to eliminate maybe a quarter to a third, maybe as many as half of their own delusions. Hollywood has preached a sense of humor and honesty, an ability to look at your own mistakes. That also has enabled us to eliminate some of our delusions. But across all of human history, only one method has been found that enables human beings to overcome a large fraction of their delusions, and that's called criticism. I have an aphorism, citocate. Criticism is the only known antidote to error. I cannot overcome most of my delusions. But you don't have the same delusions. You, my friends, my enemies, can notice my delusions because they're not the same ones that some of them are the same, and that's when it gets difficult. But they notice those of my delusions that are different than theirs, and they point them out. It's called criticism. And they do this for free. And it's how you find your own mistakes, is by soliciting criticism. Bring it. At the end of all of my books, you'll find 40 to 50 names of people who I'm thanking because they pre-read what I wrote and came in with pencils or pens or knives to point out what they thought were flaws. And at minimum, I had to make my argument better, even if they were wrong. And that's why I thank them. And if they just say, oh, I loved your book, they go off my list because I've schooled myself to think criticism is how I do better, is how I can accomplish more. I will endure the pain, and I'm human. Criticism hurts. But this is the number one thing I teach when I teach writing, for example. For 6,000 years, most of our cultures were dominated by kings, lords, priests, who hated criticism and killed the critics. And therefore, their mistakes went uncriticized, and therefore they made tons of mistakes. And I just explained to you a little thing called history, filled with horrible nastiness and villainy and errors, and even genius kings eventually made lethal mistakes. Even the ones who said, tell me the truth. Because the system didn't protect the critics. Now, that was a long and rambling lecture that led to the fundamental point, which is the great discovery of the Western Enlightenment that was talked about the one time it was tried in Periclean Athens. It was talked about by Pericles. And we have his words in Thucydides. The great innovation that has enabled us to thrive isn't so much freedom per se, though it's a tool, as it is the free flow of criticism. And you use your freedom to criticize. And what's going on right now in the West is an oligarchic putsch, an attempt by aristocrats and oligarchs of all kinds, a cabal of mafiosi and gambling lords and petro princes and others to reestablish feudalism so that they can have power that can evade any constraint on their ability to get their way. The method of 6,000 years. Now, that's a long and rambling speech, and this is long ago ceased being an interview. Sorry.
Oh, well, no, I think that goes directly to the question so you're, in a sense, I think you're touching on the big five tech companies, right? And those are, I think that's kind of at the heart of this, the oligarchies. And it sounds like you're saying that this massive consolidation threatens to lead us towards some kind of Orwellian dystopia.
Well, yes. The point that you get to after all of that rambling discourse about criticism and delusion and enlightenment is simply this. We created arenas within which human beings competitively criticize each other and compete with each other. These arenas are markets, democracy, science, justice courts, and sports. And in all 5 of these, regulation and regulators hold down the cheating that used to enable kings and priests and all of that to evade criticism. Instead, we have reciprocal accountability. If you're attacked by one of these super brainy beings called a lawyer, you hire yourself a super brainy lawyer, and you might be safe. This is what's going to happen with AI. The best defense against Skynet is to be able to hire another Skynet level genius. All 5 of these arenas thrive when light flows, when consumers and customers see everything about the products, when, I'm going to do a Vulcan thing here, when democracy, when we see everything about the candidates, and this is why one of our political parties has made blindness their number 1 goal. When science works best, when all the participants can see, courts are about transparency and mutual discovery. This is why I wrote The Transparent Society, because many in our society can sense that we're teetering on the edge of losing the Enlightenment. Many worry that we're on the verge of an Orwellian state and dominance by one elite or another to create Big Brother. But the prescription is generally, let's hide. Some of the great paladins of our fight for freedom at the ACLU and the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and so on. And I urge you all to join. Send them your money. But they seem to be of the belief that we can pass laws that will restrict potential big brothers from looking at us. And this is insane. No elite has ever allowed itself to be blinded. Find me one example across 6,000 years. It never happened. It never will happen, especially since the cameras are getting smaller, faster, better, cheaper, more numerous, and more agile every year. Our only chance in all of this is to use light to look back at power. It's called sousveillance, S-O-U-S. You answer surveillance with sousveillance, looking back from below. And those who say, how are you going to do that? My answer is, it's how we are free now. It's the trick we've used for 200 years. You look at power, you break up power into subunits, you sick them on each other, and you demand that average people see. How will an average person have equal ability to see to some rich dude or corporation or mafia? You don't ask for that. You join an NGO like the ACLU or the Electronic Frontier Foundation. They pull your membership dues and they'll hire the lawyers and the roboticists for you. It's the greatest invention of the 20th century, the NGO. And it is the thing that Vladimir Putin, by the way, hates most about the West. You listen to his speeches, and the thing he rails against the most is the NGO, the non-governmental organizations of the West.
Well, so on another level, and this is kind of out there, but you'd written Foundation's Triumph in 1999, and that was in Isaac Asimov's universe. And I just had to ask you about that because I've read Foundation as well, and I've read Foundation's Triumph, and what I wondered about was, is it possible, do you think, to see psychohistory in real life? Do you think that's something that we may ever see? Because that would... Oh, I'm sorry.
No. Go on.
Well, and again, I'll quit reading the question, but I guess it kind of comes back to the oppression part, right? But there's this idea of big tech companies eliminating freedom, and if to some level, not on a personal level, but even on a social level, they're able to do something like psychohistory, to me that seems like it would be kind of beyond the pale, I guess, in terms of that Orwellian dystopia.
Well, first off, I enjoyed writing Foundation's Triumph. It unrolled swiftly, and Janet Asimov kindly said that it was her favorite Asimov book that Isaac didn't write. I tied together every loose end I could find, including from very obscure Asimovian titles like The Stars Like Dust and Currents of Space and Pebble in the Sky.
It was a good book.
I enjoyed it, and I brought everything full circle to where I thought Isaac was going. As for psychohistory, the concept has inspired a great many nerdy minds for half a century, all the way from very bright people who are pro-civilization like Paul Krugman, all the way to Asuo Sugihara, the leader of Shinrikyo, the Japanese terror group, and Osama bin Laden. The notion of control through prediction is one that I've talked about in a number of short stories. For example, in my latest short story collection, Insistence of Vision. It's an alluring fantasy, and it probably can't happen because humans, when we find out that there's a method to predict, the first thing we look for is a way to utilize that by surprise and do an end run around that methodology. I think this is almost instinctively one reason why our civilization has emphasized diversity. Another thing we do is Hollywood preaches 4 positive messages and 2 bad messages. Suspicion of authority, diversity, eccentricity, and tolerance. And if you look at those, they all tend to make us less predictable, especially the eccentricity part. And if you watch popular films, suspicion of authority is blatantly there throughout the movie, but the main character exhibits some eccentric trait. And here's the deal. It doesn't have to be your eccentric trait for you to bond with that person. Oh, that's a fellow eccentric. It helps you bond with the hero. This is why, by the way, the oligarchy is trying so hard to do their coup now. Because with 90% of human children getting educated nowadays, a fantastic piece of good news that is underrated by the press, they're being inculcated with these values by Hollywood. If this is allowed to continue for another 20, 30 years, no one will be able to use Asimovian methods to control us. It will be Star Trek or chaos. Now, you may wonder what those 2 bad messages are. They are there out of laziness, because movie directors have to have their heroes in jeopardy for 90 minutes. Therefore, you can never have a working civilization or government or institution help you. They all must be evil or stupid. And two, you can never have your neighbors help you. I assure you, if the phone lines all go down and biker gangs are rolling through your neighborhood, terrorizing everybody, you knock on a couple of neighborhood doors and you will start getting help. So that helps to make movies unrealistic.
Yes. Well, David, I want to thank you so much for your time. And so that was all of the questions that I had, but I should close with asking about your personal goals and direction and ambition and what comes next. What comes next for you? What are you working on and what's upcoming, I guess, in your life and career?
Well, at my age, I need to ration the time. And one of the great big time sinks I've had a lot of is phone interviews. The other, but no, I'm spread much too thin. I'm talking with lawyers about enforcing my patents, for example. We're about to publish my 16th novel ourselves because publishers are terrified of comedy. They 1 in 20 comedies is a success, and they can never tell which one. So it's called The Ancient Ones, and by the time you have your transcript out, it'll be available at davidbrin.com. I just published my 3rd short story collection, Insistence of Vision, and I'm sure Tim Ventura will have links for all of these.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
At the bottom of the page. Of course, the work that everybody's nagging me to do is another uplift novel. And I'm hoping to get all my parenting and consulting and patenting and public speaking and all of those things under control and out of the way so I can get back to doing the one thing that civilization really thinks I'm good at. So we'll see if I can manage that.